My Best Friends Live in the Woods. The Adventures of Albert by Michelle Mracek. Chapter 33. The Party. Well, let's see. There's a total of 22 guests. Oh my, where will we put them all? Mother Skunk was looking about the kitchen. Everyone had returned home from their invitations and reported all invited were planning on coming. Chitty Witty, Charlie, Daniel, and Jack were already playing tag around the meeting logs in front, their peals of laughter drifting in the kitchen window. "They are giving me an idea," Albert said as he watched the four at their game of tag. "Let's expand the circle of logs. We could add several more seats." He rubbed his chin as he pondered the idea. Layla chimed in. "That would be great. We could let everyone drift in and out. It will cool off by this evening," she agreed. Mother Skunk liked the idea. "I just wish we had gotten the new door wreath made," she sighed. "It would be so nice to greet our guests." Benjamin stepped up. "What do you need to make it?" He smiled at her. "Long stem pink roses and rosemary stems," she said with a longing sigh. It wasn't often that Mother Skunk really wanted something for herself, and Albert and Benjamin recognized how much she was longing for a wreath. "And don't forget the purple ribbon," Nicholas added, grinning. He trotted over to the pantry and produced the shriveled half of a purple carrot Gabby had given him. "Where did you get that?" Albert was surprised. "From Gabby, after you all ran off with Jimmy for the stick game," Nicholas said. Albert felt a twinge of guilty conscience. "Let's get a small pot of water boiling and cook that carrot. It will be enough to dye the ribbon," Bluebell said enthusiastically as she headed to get a pot. "Oh, splendid!" Mother Skunk was delighted. As the pot boiled, the carrot began to turn the water the loveliest purple. It was fun to watch the color flow, and Nicholas, Benjamin, Bluebell, Albert, Layla, and Mother Skunk were all standing in a half circle around the pot, peering in. "I'll get the ribbon," Bluebell offered. "Let's leave it in a long time," Mother Skunk said as Bluebell carefully lowered the ribbon into the dye. "I want it nice and dark," she smiled. "Okay, so while that soaks, let's go gather the pink roses and rosemary," Nicholas said, walking over to grab a basket from the pile by the door. So the merry little group all began chattering as they grabbed a basket and headed out. "I'll stay back and watch the dye pot," Bluebell called after them. "Do you want me to stay?" Benjamin looked back to Bluebell. "I'm fine, go ahead," she smiled. Mother Skunk was still standing in front of the pot, watching the ribbon turning ever deeper shades of purple. "I'm so excited," she smiled at Bluebell. Bluebell put her arm around Mother's waist and leaned her head over on Mother's shoulder. The two stood a bit, watching the ribbon. Then Bluebell gave Mother a squeeze and went back into the kitchen. Outside, the sun had risen high overhead, and everything seemed soaked in its energy. The cool damp of morning long gone into a steaming afternoon. They all followed Albert as they headed first to the rose thicket. It was a favorite spot of Albert and Clara's. Albert liked to pick rose hips for her since it was her favorite treat. He caught himself missing her. Layla had thought to put 4 knives in her basket, and everyone was thankful as they started their harvest. "Did you think you were gonna break off the stems with your teeth?" She laughed at the boys as she handed each a knife. "Remember, cut long stems," Nicholas said, as much to himself as to the others. "How many do you think we need?" Benjamin asked as they began. "Let's get lots. Let's make a huge wreath. Mother wants it so much. It should be magnificent," Albert said with gusto. Everyone nodded in agreement and spread out through the rose thicket to gather the best blooms with the longest stems. Be sure to use your knife to strip off the thorns before you put it in the basket, Layla instructed. No one will want to weave them with the thorns on, she said. They all agreed and sat with each rose and cut up all the thorns. This took time and the baskets filled slowly. But at last they had 4 baskets of long-stemmed roses and moved on to gather rosemary. The herb grew in several locations, but the one closest to the roses was the logical choice. I don't think we need too many, just a few as an accent, Nicholas said, and the others agreed. When they arrived back home, they could smell gingerbread cookies. The aroma was floating out the kitchen window. There was a flurry of activity outside as well. The game of tag was now turned into a game of Mother Skunk's invention. She challenged Chitty Witty, Charlie, Daniel, and Jack to see who could make the biggest pile of sticks. To make it fair, Chitty Witty's sticks would each count as 2. Mother Skunk had smiled to herself with the idea. Now I can check firewood for tonight off my list, she had said to herself. Timothy, George, Frank, Henry, and Ricky were all dragging the sitting logs out to make a bigger circle and carrying in new logs to add to the circle. Benjamin motioned to the other boys and whispered to Albert, Well, did we luck out? He smiled. Oh, wonderful! Mother Skunk clapped her hands with delight at the sight of the full flower baskets. You can't start till Molly gets back with Clara, Mother continued. She wanted to help with the wreath making, she said, turning back to her mixing bowl. Melanie, Abigail, and Rosie all had their aprons on and flour all over themselves. They were on the baking team. Mother Skunk had a production line going, and batch after batch of gingerbread cookies were coming out of the hearth and onto the cooling racks. Violet and Larissa were responsible for carefully stacking the cool cookies onto platters. Debbie, Teresa, Jewel, and Marigold were washing hosta leaves from 4 baskets filled to the brim with the tasty leaves. Apparently, they had been on the hosta team and were already back from picking them. Bluebell acted as general manager, going from group to group, giving helpful suggestions and keeping everyone focused and on track. The ribbon is hanging up by the hearth drying. It should be ready by the time the wreath is woven. Oh, and I set the dye pot in the back room. I thought we might want it to dye something else, so I saved it for later, Bluebell explained. The 4 rose gatherers were a bit overwhelmed with all the activity. When they had left, all was quiet. Now the entire family was a beehive of activity. Organized chaos. Suddenly, Albert's ears perked. He heard Clara's laugh as she and Molly burst into the kitchen. They were running and laughing as they charged in. Okay, now you can weave the door wreath, Mother Skunk called out. Mother Skunk pointed to an empty table on the other side of the kitchen. I saved you a workspace, she smiled. So Molly, Clara, Albert, Benjamin, Layla, and Nicholas were Team Weave Wreath. They wove and tied stems with twine to secure it into an absolutely huge wreath. Gosh, do you think it will even fit on the door? Nicholas said as he stood back to admire their work. Only one way to find out, Benjamin said. Albert, get the other side and let's carry it out, Benjamin said as he stood to lift one side. The 2 carried it through the kitchen and outside. The other boys that were working in the yard all ran over to admire the huge wreath. There were lots of wow and neat and it's huge as Benjamin and Albert hung it on its new home, the nail in the front door. It did fit, but just barely. Should we call Mother out to see it? Layla asked excitedly. Not yet, Bluebell said, walking out, holding a beautiful long purple ribbon. She worked skillfully and wove the treasure all the way around, leaving a long tail at the starting point to tie a bow. "Just enough," she said, smiling, as she tied a beautiful bow on the other side, streamers hanging down. "Now, let's go get Mother," she beamed. Molly and Clara scampered in. "Come outside," they said as they dashed in to pull Mother away from her cookies. They each had a hold of one of Mother's hands, literally pulling her toward the door. "Now close your eyes," they laughed and led her out the door, and grabbing her shoulders, turned her around to face the door. "Surprise!" they all yelled. Mother Skunk gasped, her hand over her mouth. She was speechless. Tears welled up in her eyes. "It's more beautiful than I ever imagined," she said, and everyone cheered. Albert reached over and held Clara's hand as she stood next to him. Molly noticed and smiled. Bluebell walked up to her mother and gave her a big hug, then took her hand and kissed it. Then Albert let go of Clara and walked up to Mother Skunk. He too gave her a huge hug and then also took her hand and kissed it. Suddenly, every child was connected in spirit and fell into line to do the same. One after the next, they gave Mother Skunk a huge, loving hug, then held her hand and kissed it, as if she were a queen. Clara took a turn right after Molly, and Mother nodded and smiled, knowing full well this was to be her first daughter-in-law. Benjamin also took his turn and whispered, "Thank you," as he hugged her. Jillian and Anthena had been on a walk. They needed time alone to talk and heal. They had walked up to the edge of the circle of sitting logs just as Molly and Clara had led Mother Skunk out to see the wreath. Watching each child pay homage to their mother in turn was truly moving. They exchanged glances and went to the end of the line. When at last it was Jillian's turn, Mother was quite overcome with emotion. She was a bit startled to see Jillian in front of her. "Priestess?" Mother said. "No, just your Jillian," she answered, and she too hugged her mother and kissed her hand. Then as she stepped aside, Anthena was in turn. "Princess!" Mother almost gasped. "No, just little Anthena, who loves you," she said and kissed her hand. When all were done, they all stood around her a moment in silence, soaking up the vibrations of love. "Are we ready for a party?" Mother asked with a huge smile. "Ready!" they all cheered. "Everyone down to the stream to clean up. The aprons need rinsing, and so do we," Bluebell laughed. And so, with lots of giggles, they all trooped down to the stream. "Remember when I splashed you?" Clara asked Albert, a twinkle in her eye. "Only every other thought," Albert said as he smiled back. As evening fell, guests began to stream in. The bunnies were the first to arrive. Larissa and Gabby immediately ran off to talk and giggle. George, the bunny twin, and George, Mother Skunk's George, went outside and began playing catch with the pine cone. They liked having the same name. Somehow it made them laugh to see the others stumble over how to call which one of them. Mrs. Rabbit offered Mother Skunk a huge basket of dandelion greens. "Oh, thank you. Let's set up a buffet table," Mother Skunk had suggested. Jimmy scampered in and went straight to Jillian. "Lavender," he said proudly, holding out the bouquet. "They're lovely," Jillian smiled. "Let's put them in a vase on the buffet," she suggested. Then Crow Teacher flew in with a squawk and made Mother Skunk jump with the noise. Everyone giggled. Then Owl flew in so quietly no one heard him and said loudly, "Good evening," standing right behind Mother Skunk, making her jump again. Everyone laughed out loud. "It's his superpower," the great stag laughed as he stepped in right behind Owl. Mother Deer joined him. "Hello, how can I help? I brought fried daylilies," she said happily. "We're setting up a buffet table," Jimmy Squirrel said, miserably mispronouncing the word. Everyone laughed again. "What?" Jimmy said, annoyed. Jillian corrected him, leaning over and quietly whispering in his ear, "It's pronounced buffet." She grinned. Benjamin and Clara had both left a while ago to get their parents and were now arriving. Clara's mother with the promised basket of raspberries on her arm. Benjamin's mother leaned over and whispered to her son, "Should I have brought something? I feel terrible," she said, worried. "You did." Benjamin smiled as he produced a necklace with a lovely carved flower of clamshell on a purple cord. His mother gasped. "I'll explain later," he said, and returned the lovely necklace to his vest pocket. Last to arrive was Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. The missus was waddling slowly, leaning heavily on her husband's arm. "Albert, fetch Mrs. Beaver a chair by the kitchen table," Mother Skunk called out. Mrs. Beaver was huffing and puffing as her husband helped her lower herself onto the chair. "Oh, thank you ever so much," she panted. Bluebell automatically began making her a cup of mint tea. "Bless you," Mrs. Beaver said gratefully, accepting the cup. "I keep telling the great creator, why don't you hold the babies for a while so I can rest? I'll take them back after a nice nap." But he never does, she teased. Mother Skunk laughed out loud. "I remember wanting that too," she laughed. "Let's all gather outside on the meeting logs now that everyone is here," Mother Skunk called out in a loud voice. All the guests began choosing a seat on the log circle just outside the front door, now sporting its beautiful pink rose wreath. "Oh, sorry, can you manage it?" Mother Skunk said, looking at Mrs. Beaver, who had just settled onto her chair with her cup of tea in hand. "Let's carry her," Benjamin laughed. "Oh my!" Mrs. Beaver looked wide-eyed. Albert, Benjamin, Nicholas, and Mr. Beaver hoisted her up and went trudging out the door with a laughing Mrs. Beaver. "Scoot!" they yelled to Abigail and Melody, who were sitting on the log closest to the door. They scampered up with a surprised laugh as the boys carefully lowered Mrs. Beaver onto the log. "See, didn't even spill your tea," Benjamin grinned. Once the chatter had died down and everyone had found a seat, Mother Skunk stepped up. "Thank you for coming. This evening, I wanted to celebrate. We have so much to be thankful for, and many to thank. Bringing Larissa home was a blessing, and now that Jillian is recovered, we can all be joyous." Everyone cheered. Then Albert stood up. "You all should know Jimmy Squirrel was quietly running back and forth refilling our baskets with sage. He is a hero," Albert said as he smiled at his friend. "Aw, shucks," Jimmy squirmed and flicked his tail. "Hero, hero, hero." Albert started the chant. Jimmy stood up and took a little bow. Mrs. Squirrel was so proud she gushed. "Oh, James Thornton, I knew you would do great things one day." "We have a buffet set up. Everyone can nibble all evening," Mother Skunk continued. Then Albert stood up again. "Before we eat, I have something very special I need to ask, and I want all of you here. He walked over and stood in front of Clara. Holding both of her hands, he stood her up and looked straight into her eyes. Clara, we're still too young to marry, but I promise myself to you. I am now and forever yours. Will you promise yourself to me? He said most seriously. I promise myself to you, Clara responded with solemn intent. From now on, I belong to you. She smiled. Clara's parents stood up and rushed to their daughter. Her mother was so excited she was jumping up and down. Well done! Wonderful! She cheered as she gave both Clara and Albert a hug. Clara's father shook Albert's hand and patted him on the back, all smiles. Everyone cheered. Bluebell was watching from the side, a sullen look on her face. As they sat down, Benjamin stepped forward and walked across to Bluebell. He led her into the circle and pulled from his pocket the magnificent necklace, a large flower of carved mother of pearl on a clamshell that dangled from a purple cord. Bluebell gasped wide-eyed. Benjamin held the necklace up to the sky. Spirit of the stars, bless this token of my love, he said solemnly. Then he held the necklace toward the stream. Spirit of the waters, bless this token of my love, he said. Then he held the necklace toward the little fire that was blazing in the center of the circle. Spirit of the flames, bless this token of my love, he continued. Then he held the necklace up toward the trees. Spirit of the forest, bless this token of my love. Then he turned to a speechless Bluebell, her eyes filling with joyful tears. As he got down on one knee, he took her hand and asked, Bluebell, will you marry me? Will you be my wife? She squealed and shouted, yes! So loud she startled herself as she clapped her hands with delight. Benjamin jumped up and drew her to him, giving her a wonderful kiss as everyone cheered. Then he placed the necklace over her head so it hung down and sparkled on her chest. Bluebell had never seen such a beautiful adornment, and she immediately grabbed at it and held it out to look at it closely. She looked up at Benjamin, tears of joy running down her cheeks. Then Benjamin motioned for his parents and Mother Skunk to join them in the circle. Mom, Mother Skunk, he said as they came closer, I have something for each of you, he said as he produced 2 more carved mother of pearl necklaces, just smaller versions of the one Bluebell now wore. He placed one around his mother's head and then Mother Skunk's. We are now one family, he said. A great cheer rose from all the family and friends circled around them. This is perfect, Bluebell beamed. Thank you. She smiled at her husband-to-be. Let's eat! I'm hungry! Charlie's little voice called out, and everyone laughed. Tummies always win! Mother Skunk laughed. Let's party! She called. Everyone started streaming past her, heading in the door toward the buffet. Beautiful wreath! They each exclaimed as they entered.
Bless this token of my love. Spirit of the stars, bless
Chapter 33. The Party. Discussion and questions. Appreciation and commitment. Everyone wants and needs to be appreciated. Sadly, we often take for granted the people in our lives who do the most for us. Making the door wreath for Mother Skunk was her family's appreciation made visible. She will treasure it as a symbol of their appreciation. Question 1. Is there someone you need to show how much they are appreciated? Question 2. Has someone given you a token of their appreciation which you treasure? When the children lined up to hug their mother and kiss her hand, it was a spontaneous expression of their love and appreciation. Question 3. How do you show your love and appreciation to those who care for you? Albert feels it is important to publicly recognize Jimmy for his contributions supplying sage. Question 5. Is there someone who deserves your recognition for their efforts? Albert and Clara, Benjamin and Bluebell publicly commit to a life together. By including their friends and family, they amplify their love and commitment. Question 5. How does including family and friends change the commitments in your life? Benjamin had gone to great lengths to create the beautiful necklaces. He asked for the blessing of the elements, stars, water, fire, and forest, to further sanctify his token of love. Question 6. How does having a symbol or token of your commitment to another focus your intentions? Question 7. Do ceremonies bring extra meaning to our commitments? I am the composer and performer for all the music in this video. Both audio recordings and the printed scores are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. I will provide the link below. The painted illustrations are also my creation. Prints are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. This is a novel. The chapters are meant to be heard in the order in which they were written. And while each chapter can stand alone, they do build as new characters are introduced and past events are referred to. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The chapters are numbered, so if you're just joining us, be sure to go back and watch from chapter 1.
Spirit flies to the pink horizon of the forest, where fairies say, "Come and play," and the animals say, "There's a better